right, so welcome back to another episode of the Barron Report. If you're actually watching this on YouTube, you probably noticed something a little bit different is our set. The reason behind that is this is a special series that we're doing specifically on the coronavirus impact to the restaurant and hospitality business. There's a ton of actions that have been going on behind the scenes here at Foodable Network over the past few weeks, and of course now is the time we've started to launch all of this to get it out there for the operators that are obviously experiencing some very difficult times right now. So the Barron Report, if you have, maybe this is your first time listening in on this podcast, the idea behind this podcast is it is usually all about business, economics, and even sometimes politics that plays into the society and our overall business aspect of the restaurant and hospitality space, and also kind of flows into general business as a whole. So we like to cover things here on the show that are everything from interviews to research and data, and then obviously topical points such as what we're talking about today. Now, we had an episode last week, which essentially was our first episode of our coronavirus special series. This is continuing on. This will be episode 2 of our series. And I wanted to basically take some time to introduce to you the things that we are doing here at Foodable Network to kind of help move this industry forward. So first thing you see here on screen right now is a little bit about a concept called the Coronavirus Impact Center. Now, if you've been to Foodable Network before, foodabletv.com, you'll notice right there on the top right it says news. That's where all of our insight centers are. And an insight center is basically a culmination of different types of stories, videos, podcasts, research, etc., that's all centered into one place. And you'll be able to find that now on our masthead literally under news. It'll be Coronavirus Impact, and I'll show you a little bit about what that's going to look like. The other thing that we've done, other than launching the Insight Center, is we've also put together a Coronavirus International Restaurant Action Committee. Now, this is something that's very important. We launched it essentially yesterday, Monday, this week, and the goal behind this was to essentially make it available to the industry, primarily leaders that are in charge of the restaurant concepts or chains, suppliers, and also industry experts. And the theme behind this is basically to kind of culminate a variety of things that are happening within the industry, both from a news aspect, best practices, and I'll kind of walk through some of the details. But if you want to get involved, and essentially there's a few limitations of what we need from you to be able to get involved, you would visit foodabletv.com/coronavirus-impact. So you see that right there on screen right now. Just go to that URL. Or follow me on Twitter because I've been tweeting that URL, and you can of course click it from there. Very easy. On Twitter it's just @PaulBarron, and you'll be able to get to the Coronavirus Impact Committee, Restaurant Committee. Let's talk a little bit about what the committee is going to be doing, what we need to survive this. This is something that we put together. Our advisors kind of over the last few weeks have really kind of been looking at this very closely as things developed in China. Obviously, we've seen some significant ramp up here in the U.S. in terms of case numbers. We are now, as of today, over 1,000 cases. 1 week ago, we were at 500, and it's still very undetermined as to whether or not we, just like China, are most likely underreporting, mainly due to the fact that we don't have a lot of tests out there that are available. So let's talk about the committee and how it's going to work. First is you're going to respond to the email if you got one from me, or my social thread to take part in the action committee, which is basically we're going to communicate weekly on things that we're finding, both from a news aspect, trends, potentially forecast trends of potential hotspot areas that may be impacting the restaurant and hospitality space. 2 is we want you to take part in podcasts and share your strategies. And this is very important for the restaurant industry. As you guys know, the restaurant industry is one that kind of comes together when in time of need. And we've done this before. 15 years ago, I launched the Fast Casual Alliance. And the idea behind the Fast Casual Alliance was to culminate CEOs and leaders across the industry to help the fast casual industry grow and start to develop a structure of how those brands could develop over the years. We merged that with the NRA. It soon became the Restaurant Industry Councils, which is now the Fast Casual Industry Council. So this this is not new to how we do business here at Foodable Network. We have done this before and done it successfully, and we're continuing our efforts in some other areas as well. I won't talk about that right now, but I want to stay on the coronavirus. So take part in podcasts. I'll reach out from you from time to time if you've joined the committee, mainly so we can kind of get a feedback from you and what's happening in your community with your operations and some of the best practices that you're taking as a restaurant operator or brand leader in being able to fend off how we deal with this on an economic aspect, because this is really something that our industry has never faced, probably in its history. When you look back as far as 1918, which was really the last pandemic, and of course this week, finally the WHO has finally actually called this a pandemic, which actually changes some financial structures when you call it a pandemic versus an epidemic. I won't get into that either. There's going to be a lot more conversation here on this show, and also our companion podcast called Decade of Disruption. If you have not checked that one out, hit it up on iTunes or Spotify. You'll be able to catch some stuff over there as well. Make sure and subscribe to the Barron Report, because this is going to be the fastest way that you'll be able to get information. And we are ramping up our number of productions here in the studio to be able to come to you live or as fast as possible with new and late-breaking information. Today we're going to be breaking down some things that are happening in Seattle, so make sure and stay tuned for that. Number 3 is we want to share local business impacts with full transparency. This is the thing that I think a lot of restaurant industry leaders do a really good job, and that is just being fully transparent on how the business is being impacted, some things that you and your employees and or your guest climate are experiencing with your operation. These are key things that we've got to have in terms of being able to help each other out. And if we can save just one restaurant, it's going to be worth it. But the idea is to help thousands of restaurants stay in business. And when you see the numbers coming out of Washington State, it's pretty alarming, and it's very, very early in this situation. So number 4, please forward this information to your fellow leaders and colleagues that could potentially assist in these efforts. That's the biggest thing that we would love for you. And of course, we're going to publishing our findings each week at foodabletv.com/coronavirus-impact. And that's going to be tips, strategies, parts of this show and others, along with a variety of interviews coming up on this show, probably on a daily basis for the near foreseeable future. All right, so let's move on here, because this is something that I want to really focus on, and that is the Action Committee, and really what were the 3 things that we've done to try to get things moving. 1, obviously, we've launched the Action Committee itself to assist in information, best practices and information out there. 2, we're taking heavy measures on data gathering. This is the thing that we started doing last month. Literally, when I started tracking this, our data analyst team out of India, we put together a new algorithm format that essentially looks at our industry specifically as it's related to coronavirus cases worldwide, but specifically here in the US and Canada. And this is going to help us on understanding the true impact of both restaurant visits, sentiment from consumers, and also closures, because we track individual restaurants as they're doing activities online in the digital format, such as Twitter, Facebook, all the different scenarios that we track on Foodable Labs. Foodable Labs is the hub of where most of our data comes from. If you have not had a chance to visit Foodable Labs, make sure and hit it. It's just foodabelabs.com. You can also follow it on Twitter, just at Foodable Labs. So that was number 2, is to really ramp up our data process and being able to report back to you guys as much of the data that we can get to and basically churn within enough time to be able to make an impact. And then also something that we've been doing really over the past few years is looking at early indicators, and it's something that kind of is our trend and kind of our format here at Foodable Network, is we've been able to isolate and identify trends as they start to occur. Typically, these trends occur from the very base level of data gathering, and that's on consumer conversation. It's going to be really no different here with the coronavirus. I think consumer conversation is obviously at an all-time high right now. It's only going to get heavier as we see more and more conversations really kind of flood the market. Being able to sift through that data and be able to come back to you with real information that can help your business is the key. Number 3 is what you're looking at right now. We've launched our awareness podcast series. This is a special series here on the Barron Report. It is designed specifically to help the states and cities. So we'll have a lot of state officials, state restaurant associations, city level operators that will be on interviews here on this show that will be giving us that kind of feedback. This is going to be very important. And we do have a special arrangement. We just put this together last night for our podcast distribution to be able to get the information out there as fast as possible on Spotify. So this is huge in being able to get the information out to restaurant operators, maybe for the first time that's been listening to a podcast or a video, watching a video over on YouTube like this. So hopefully you found this if you have never heard of the Barron Report and Foodable Network before, and it's going to help you at least curtail and essentially be ready for what's coming in terms of the restaurant industry and the economic impact. This right here is a screenshot of where you can find this on Foodable TV. So if you just go to foodabletv.com, you'll see right there, that second link is news. Right there is our Coronavirus Impact Insight Center, and that's where all of these videos, podcasts, and research will be housed. This will start to really pick up steam as things go along. The research and data reports will continue to go out there, and really kind of next up is going to be talking about that. So let's go into Seattle. So Seattle has been the hardest hit so far in the U.S. in terms of both case and also the impact economically. So this statement came from the CNN travel site there on the Washington State Hospitality Association. Many restaurants in Seattle reported a 40% drop in business last week. Now this is Monday, the 11th of March. Last week, that was a 40% drop. And so we're seeing already a very big hit on Seattle and the restaurant industry. Some things that the restaurants are doing within Seattle is restaurants are getting kind of creative and changing the way they do business. And this is something that I think is kind of ironic. We've actually been talking about this for quite a while, and that is that we saw a shift coming really last year that we would see more and more restaurants moving to on-demand platforms or delivery and or pickup and takeout. I believe this may be something that is going to energize that for the industry. As we come out of this, it could reformat the way the restaurant industry does business, because the fear I have, and I have a lot of friends in the medical community and that they have, is that this is not necessarily a one-hit wonder. It's very possible that we could see more and more of this. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, often mentions this as one of the key things that will most likely impact our society in the next 25 years most detrimentally, and that is not wars, not a nuclear bomb, but in fact a pandemic, and something that can be hard enough on our society if we're not ready. So economically, we've got to be able to structure our businesses in ways that can be able to deal with this. So these restaurants that are going to these takeout only formats there in Seattle, this could be a big thing to watch as those restaurants start to move forward and hopefully having good success on people that are just basically staying home and eating, instead of at a restaurant, eating at home and putting it into the restaurant industry that way. Obviously, we are going to see some pretty significant numbers hitting us, and this is our first data point that we're reporting. And this also aligns with what's happening right there. So as you see here, the Seattle Times Food and Drink, with business dwindling, several Seattle restaurants are closing, citing the novel coronavirus outbreak. Here's the actual numbers that we're pulling from Foodable Labs, and this is two factors here. One is the Seattle restaurant visits, which is the blue, and the green is Seattle restaurant closures. Now we've got these kind of lopsided because we're showing a percentage and a unit count. So when you look at this, but essentially the first negative week was 21.5%. This was in February, end of February, down 21.5% from the beginning of February. And now here we are only on March 10th, and we're down in Seattle 51.2%. So it kind of lines up with what the Washington State Restaurant Association stated last week of seeing 40% downward trends. We think it's actually greater than that right now. I'm fearful of seeing what this is going to look like at the end of March for the city of Seattle as they really kind of go to draconian measures, which are self-isolation and self-separation. Obviously, they haven't put a lockdown like what we've seen in Italy, which is the entire country is now locked down, or even back to even a month ago when China, of course, essentially quarantined the largest number of people ever in the history of Earth at 60 million in the Hubei province. We are seeing some major impacts here, and Seattle is kind of the epicenter here in the United States of being able to look at this. Here's the other factor that is concerning me the most is the number of restaurants that we're tracking as closures. And in January, we were down 55 restaurants. By the end of February, we were down 91 restaurants, so almost double that number. And here we are only on the 10th of March when this data was pulled just the other night. We are up to 151 restaurant closures in this greater Seattle area. This is massive when you look at the scale. If we were to extrapolate this at a level that's similar to Seattle into the major restaurant cities across the United States, I fear what this could do to the restaurant industry. So hopefully these tips that we're going to be bringing to you here on this show are going to be things that can help you prepare. And in the back half of this presentation today, we're going to be talking about that and really kind of setting it up. Because if you aren't already here and prepared, it essentially, in some cases, for some restaurants, it's literally too late. We're at a stage right now that we are now looking at preparation out beyond 60, 90 days. Obviously, we don't know what necessarily the U.S. government is going to do in terms of small business relief. There have been some indications from Trump that we could see payroll taxes being essentially eliminated for the rest of the year. Whether or not that gets through the Democrats and through our bipartisanship requirements that we'd have to do at the legislative level, that's still yet to be determined. There will be some things, I think, that could be things like bridge loans from the SBA. There could also be some scenarios, but we're going to be watching this pretty heavily and bringing you as much information that potentially can help you in each and every one of your states out there. So Seattle, we wish the best to you guys as things start to escalate there. We're going to take a break real quick, but we're going to be right back with kind of these trends that I think are going to help the restaurant industry come out of this scenario. It could be still months away, and we also could be looking at a resurgence. If you look back at the SARS epidemic and what happened during that, and I was just looking at data yesterday on this, essentially what happened was in the early months of the year, SARS, of course, accelerated, had a fairly large growth. It went into its dormancy, and then it resurged in the fall, even greater than it had done in the winter months of that year. So, and this is what a lot of medical professionals are warning against, is a potential second wave. And that's something that, of course, our industry could not take unless we are prepared. So we'll be right back with kind of getting into that. All right, so we're back here on the Barron Report, and of course, we're continuing our coverage here on the coronavirus economic impact on the restaurant industry, and specifically how restaurant operators can deal with this in the coming months, and hopefully today even, if you have not already started to implement. And this is some data that we started tracking, as I said, last year. Last year, the idea was that online delivery trends were really on a movement, and of course, this could be the saving grace for online delivery and or a completely different business model for the restaurant industry. And this, of course, plays into the ghost restaurant model. It plays into a lot of factors that would eliminate the need for having people eating in your restaurant as basically your primary source of income. Of course, we know today that these numbers are very low. So let's look at it. Delivery adoption will transform our society. This was a presentation I did the last quarter of last year on data. By 2025, 1 in 4, that's 25%. Of Americans will be ordering food for delivery each week. Today, that number is 1 in 11. This could accelerate even greater because of what we're seeing here with the coronavirus, which could reformat the way business models are actually done in the food service space. So let's go into delivery customers here, and I just want to kind of run down the numbers here. If you look back in 2017, we've been tracking this for quite some time, especially when Uber Eats and Postmates Grubhub came on to the scene. 16.3 million in meals in delivery customers in 2017, 19.1 million in 2018. Now we're at 24.9. 2020, this year we'll see almost 30 million. That's getting up to that 10% of our entire population, and potentially by 2025, 87 million. Now we're getting into essentially 50% of the population, but ordering at a rate of 1 in 4 Americans on food delivery in each week for you. So as you can see, this trend is definitely not slowing down. It's definitely on an upward trend. What may slow down is the methods in which online and food delivery and or pickup and catering is done. And let's talk a little bit more about that. So revenue growth in food delivery via ghost restaurants. So this is another one. By 2025, the expansion would equate to about 30% of food service sales. Remember, this is a presentation I gave 5 months ago. 5 months ago in the early fourth quarter of where this would be at that time. This, of course, now changes the game as to how the restaurant industry should be dealing with potentially looking at ghost restaurants and ghost operations as your primary source of income. That's right, I said primary source of income. Again, all bets are off if the coronavirus scenario wraps up here in the US and it doesn't hit us like Italy and it doesn't hit us like China. Unfortunately, I just don't think that's a possibility. I think we are in for a very severe impact on both economic fronts as well as just how our business models work over time. So again, numbers here, as you can see, really start to accelerate all the way out to 2025 at almost 82 meals per year per person. This is a big deal because when you look at the number of meals of people eating out as opposed to people having delivery, this is a major shift in operations. It's a major shift in how you market. It's also a major shift in how you build out your stores. This is probably the most concerning fact to me, is that basically the restaurant industry is a real estate industry. It has so much impact on real estate. And we've already seen this with the fall of retail and the demise of what we've seen as kind of the mom and pop retail shops over the past 10 years with Amazon. And now the fact that we've seen a complete remap of how malls are actually built and operated here in the US, where we're seeing more and more malls start to fall off. We could see those cornerstone restaurant concepts that take up so much of our US real estate start to disappear and move into these types of operations. So there are some companies out there, obviously Kitchen United and Travis Kalanick's, which is Cloud Kitchens. Both of those have kind of taken this stance of being able to build out these networks of ghost kitchens to be able to deal with such a massive increase potentially in online food delivery sales and on takeaway sales. Where will the market be impacted? These are the number of restaurants in the United States from 2011 to 2018. You kind of see we've kind of been moving up and down throughout the years over the past 7 years. Not a lot of great growth, not a lot of heavy fall off. It's the typical numbers that you see in the restaurant industry with ebb and flow of restaurant concepts. Some fall out, some gain. I don't necessarily think that is going to be the case here. I won't really go into the number transactions that we're looking at right now, but this will be coming up in a couple of episodes, that The number of impacted restaurants over the next 90 days, between now and essentially June 1st, are astronomical at the rate in which we see the coronavirus growing and causing either quarantine or self-quarantine, or essentially less movement in our society, which means less moving out and going out to eat. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the explosion of non-traditional flex space. Now, you're a restaurant operator. You're out there thinking, well, okay, Paul, if this is going to be the new norm on how our business splits up in terms of our day part and also our product mix and how we sell, most of your sales are going to start to move to an online platform. If you are not prepared in an online platform right now, that is number one on your project list. Is you've got to get your website, your mobile apps in play as fast as possible and get ready for starting to build your restaurant concepts in communities through flex space. And now flex space, many of you might know this, our studio's in a flex space. We have essentially, you're kind of off the beaten path. It's usually larger space that is much lower in cost rather than the high-end retail that you typically have. And it can usually handle flex, meaning it can handle power requirements that you might need. Obviously for your city, you've got to have your ventilation hoods if you're cooking, and obviously for your ability. But the key thing here is you have no retail. There's no retail operation. So it changes your dynamic of how your business goes. These are the things that we're going to look at in terms of net gain restaurant openings. So in 2019, we had a net gain of 26,000 restaurants. 2020, we're estimating that at about 32,000 restaurants. That was pre-coronavirus. This will change dramatically from 2020 on. The question will be 2021 and 2022 as we start to see the effects of this, because the fallout of what we're seeing here on the coronavirus could be so much in terms of devastation to our industry that the model itself may be flipped on its head. So hopefully for your restaurant operators out there, whether you're a CEO or maybe you're a brand new restaurant operator that's trying to deal with this, the number one thing is you've got to get your on-demand moving, and you've got to start to developing in-restaurant systems to be able to deal with pickup and delivery. My guess is that we might start seeing some of the gig economy limitation of movement if it gets to draconian measures here in the United States. I don't know that we'll be at that far of a level, but it is quite possible. So just like I've always said in the restaurant industry, you've got to prepare for the improbable. Always be ready for what may not happen. Be ready for it. And that's the key here with being able to deal with the coronavirus and how it might affect you in terms of your restaurant space. All right, so we will be back to you right here on the Barron Report. We'll be covering this. I've got several interviews coming up here on the show that'll be talking about tactics that you can do as an operator or as a leader. And we're not talking about just retail sales tactics. We're talking about operational tactics, how to keep your employees, how to keep paying your employees, ways that you can start to develop new systems in place to hopefully create a new business lane. Whatever it might be, we're going to bring the best minds in the industry right here on this show, hopefully on a day in, day out basis, to be able to give you as much feedback, information, and research that we can covering this new coronavirus and its impact on the restaurant and hospitality industry. Make sure and stay tuned right here. If you have not had a chance to subscribe to the Barron Report, please do. Also hit us up if you have an idea, or maybe you're looking to tell us your story about what's going on in your community. Hit me up on Twitter @PaulBarron, or send an email to producer@foodabletv.com. We'll catch you next time right here on the Barron Report.